Hey, this is Sapura Designs for Noble Desktop, and in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to set up and use PSD files in Adobe After Effects. So we'll be taking this PSD file here and basically organizing the layers in such a way so that it's easy to animate in After Effects. We're going to be dividing up a single layer into some groups, redoing some of the words here as text layers, placing the texture, and turning the logo here into its own file so it can be animated. So here's what the project looks like when it's done. Now, this kind of thing is super important to know because very often you're going to be receiving PSD files that aren't optimally set up for After Effects. Whether you're working on a team or downloading assets, it's good to know how to set up a file so you can actually animate it. Some stuff that looks good or works in Photoshop isn't great for After Effects, but there's ways to translate your project so that it looks the same and actually animates. So for external assets, we're going to be using a PSD with all these pictures and that logo on it. So the PSD file for this will be available in the video description below. You're going to be making your own After Effects file based on it. Alright, let's check it out. So the first thing that I'm going to be doing is showing you what each of the layers has in PS. So, the layer called text, you could figure out contains all the text. As you can see, it's all on one layer. We're going to have to divide that up. This layer 2 is kind of film grain. It's set on screen. So, we're acting as if someone handed this to us in a project. The photography logo, you could see this icon means it's a smart object, right down there. And layer 4, if we hide it and reveal it, that's all the pictures all together. And then finally, layer 0 is the wood background. There's a couple of issues with how this is set up for After Effects, but we'll get into that more in depth as we go along. So let's import this as is into After Effects, and I'll show you what's going to happen. Alright, so I'm in After Effects, and let's import it. So now in After Effects, I'm importing my stuff. I'm going to hit Photo Collage, import, retain layer sizes, hit import. Yes, editable, thank you. And I'm gonna drag it onto composition. So this is for the purpose of showing you what the main issues are with how this is set up currently. So if I want to change the opacity of the text, for instance, because it's all in one layer, if I want to do each one by itself, the only way I'd be able to do it currently is like masking each part of this text layer and like hiding it and then revealing it, and it's a lot harder than it should be. Layer 2, I'm like, well, what is layer 2? Like what does it contain? And only by like hiding it and revealing it, I'm like, oh, it's the film grain. But the thing with that, like, because it's a static image, I can't make it look grainy. It's static, which again, for Photoshop, that's fine, but this is After Effects. It's all about animation. The photography logo, well, let's say that I wanted to do that kind of right-on reveal. There really isn't anything it has right now that I can use for that. Again, the only way I could kind of approximate that is by, like, drawing a mask and then animating the mask. And, like, that's it's a pain in the neck, and it's not exactly the effect that I want. Again, what's layer 4? Oh, right, it's like the pictures. So, if I want to animate that, going from one position to another, okay, cool, but, like, they're all going to move together, Like, it's not what I want. I want them all to be different. What if I, like, want to tilt one? And then layer 0, I mean, it's the wood, but again, like, what is it? It's just called layer 0. I could rename them in After Effects, but why do that when I should be setting up the file for use in the first place? So, as it is, this file can't be used in After Effects. Alright, back in PS, the first thing that we're going to be doing is let's name our layers. Alright, so layer 2 is film grain, but we're actually going to get rid of this layer and replace it with another one later on. Right now I'm keeping it. Layer 4, we're actually not going to name that because we're going to be cutting up that layer, and layer 0 is wood background. There we go. Now, the first thing we're going to be doing is let's chop up these photos. So I'm going to use my lasso tool. You can hit Q to activate that, and I'm going to cut it and paste it. So if you have a Mac, that's Command X. I have a PC, that's Control X. And then I'm going to Shift Control V. or, Shift Command V, depending on the machine that you've got. So that's one of them. So here I'm going to name it nature photo. And we're going to be chopping up each of these photos and putting it on their own layer. And then after that, we name the layer. So let's go ahead through that. All right, as you can see, we've chopped up the the photo layer into each of their own layers. We've named each one, and we're going to be repositioning them. So for instance, the family photo, I'm going to hit my transform tool, Command T or Control T. I'm going to rotate it, put it over here. And now, since each of these are on their own layer, it's a lot easier, by the way, to adjust position, where things are in Photoshop. So that's what I recommend to you. Moving it like that. So we'll skip ahead to when these are all positioned the way that we want it to. Great. Now the next thing we're going to be doing is making groups. So I'm going to go down here in Photoshop and I'm going to create a new group. I'm going to drop family photo into there and I'm going to name this group family photo group. And the reason why we're doing groups is because we're going to be adding text to this later. And when you import groups into After Effects, After Effects reads it as its own pre-comp. And so it imports into After Effects with like all the content. So it's already organized. Again, so you're getting the idea here that we want things isolated and named and grouped together. You want to do all your organization as much as you possibly can up front in Photoshop, so you don't have to do it in After Effects, because it's a lot more efficient. And also, it just makes it like you can actually animate it. If you don't do this, as I showed you before, you can't animate it. All right, so we're done putting it all into groups. I swapped nature photos with generation photos. Just the way we're going to animate it makes more sense because we're going to land on this picture last, so I want it in the top of my layer stack. So I'm also going to color code these. So right click on the group. I'm going to just, pick a different color and do that for all of them. All right, now we're up to the text. So for text, what we're going to be doing is actually retyping all these words on actual text layers, because right now this is a rasterized layer, and in After Effects, if it's rasterized, we can't use what are called text animators on them. As you saw before, they were all on the same layer. If I want to apply any kind of effect to them, it's just not going to take, and it's not going to be efficient. So we're going to be retyping these. So what I'm going to be doing is going to my text tool over here, and I'm just going to be typing in, let's see, oh, this is way too big. So the font that we're going to be using is called Seaweed. It is a Google font. You can get it for free off of Google. But use whatever you're comfortable with, whatever works for the project, and honestly just, retype the text. All right, so I've retyped this text. It's all done. And then I'm going to move it over here. And then just honestly rinse and repeat for all of these. I'm going to type in summer. So you get the idea. Oop, I misspelled that one. So yeah, just go through all of these and then we'll skip ahead to when all of the text is done. All right, all the text is done. So I'm going to go to my rasterized text layer here. I'm going to delete it. And then I am going to actually position these so that they make sense with how we're going to animate them. So now that it's positioned in the way that we want it to, I'm going to drag and drop it into the correct group over here. Right, and then rinse, wash, and repeat for the rest of these. All right, so now we have this all organized. We have all the photos chopped up. We have them in the right position. We have all the text as their own layers. And now we're going to be setting up the photography logo. So the photography logo is a smart object. It means a couple of things, but for purposes of this project, basically it means that this is acting like a vector file. But when we import into After Effects, as you saw before, it just acts like a regular rasterized plain old image file, and that means that it loses access to a lot of the text animators that are within After Effects. And we want this thing to be very flexible and easy to animate. So the way that we're going to be doing this, it's a bit of a roundabout method, but this is currently the best that we have. So what we're going to be doing is going over to this little icon in our layer stack, the smart object icon, and we're going to double click it, and it's going to open it up in Illustrator. And I'm just going to go to discard changes. That's okay. Wait for Illustrator to load. All right, now it's loaded. And what basically this has done is that we've gone to Photoshop and been like, hey, someone gave us this file, the smart object file, but we need this smart object as its own separate file. So when we double click that little icon, we're telling the programs, okay, I want you to open this up in its own separate file. And that's really important because we're going to be saving this as its own vector file, its own separate vector file. So we are just going to save it. Let's find a good location for it. So I've gone to my assets folder for my, setting up PSD's file. Put it somewhere where it's going to be collected with the rest of the assets that you're using. So I'm just going to save it as photography logo. I just agree to everything. Yes, yes, yes. And now when we animate it, we're going to have our own separate vector file that we've created from the smart object that somebody gave us within this Photoshop file. The last thing we're going to be doing is, honestly, just delete this layer because we're going to be replacing it with something totally different. All right, so that's it for the first half of this tutorial. We're going to be doing a second half of this tutorial where we actually show you how to animate now using your nicely organized Photoshop file. As always, let us know what you think in the comments below. Stay tuned for that second half. And yeah, if you have any comments or questions or even, suggestions or things you'd like to see in tutorials, definitely drop a comment below. We would love to hear from you. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one. This has been Sephora Designs for Noble Desktop.